The Royal Gorge Bridge Amusement Company held its grand opening the winter of 1929. But how can you have an amusement company without a ride? As the amazing bridge was being built in the late 20s, the concept of adding a ride to the attraction came into being. No sooner had work finished on the bridge, plans were drawn and work had already begun on the new Incline Railway. The nearby Telegraph Gulch was eyed as the best route to the bottom of this magnificent canyon. George Cole had been hired to engineer and build the bridge. The Incline Railway was his baby as well. He would team up with the Otis Elevator Company to come up with a plan to take tourists to the bottom. It was no easy task. They had to blast the top of the solid granite cliffs wide enough in spots to fit specially designed rail cars. A wheelhouse and passenger loading area needed to be designed at the top, and an area for people to get off and have a look at the bottom. By November of 1930, only 1 year after the bridge was dedicated, the Royal Gorge Amusement had its first major amusement ride. No, it isn't the Coney Island Cyclone. Or the Twister 2 at Elitch's. But where else could you put Grandma and the teenage kids into a steel cage and send them down a 1,000-foot chasm? But seriously, it was just that, a ride for all ages, and oh, the views. The official dedication took place at the start of the summer season in 1931. People who were afraid to walk the bridge or even get near the edge for some reason were willing to get into one of the incline rail cars and ride 1,550 feet to the bottom of the gorge. Perhaps it was the fact that once you were locked in, there was no changing your mind until you reached the bottom. Generations from around the world would love the 5.5-minute ride to the bottom. Dwight D. Eisenhower climbed aboard in the years after he was the Allied Supreme Commander in World War II and before he was elected president. One year, the Duke, John Wayne, would ride as well while he was in town filming a movie here. Tens of thousands of others would make the trip to the bottom every year. Fred Javernick started at the gorge during his summers in high school in the early 60s.
Yes, we all started at the bottom, literally.
He would work his way up the ranks. With the new aerial tram opening in 1969, that was his baby. But he would oversee all of the attractions for the last 15 years he worked there, for a total of 45 years. He always had a soft spot for the Incline Railway. One car would travel down, and at the midway point, the 3 tracks would split into 4, and a car heading uphill would pass. The railway traveled at 100% grade, that's 45 degrees. For every foot forward it traveled, it would drop a foot at the same time. Even after the aerial tram opened, the incline was still one of the most popular attractions. The bridge and incline were both added to the National Register of Historic Places in 1983.
Gosh, it was. Sometimes you get a little dizzy when you leaned your head way back just to see the bridge. And you could see the bridge, and you could see the cracks you could see daylight between the cracks on the planking, and it was just a unique experience.
Generation after generation would take the trip down. It stayed that way until that fateful day of June of 2013. Bill Henderson was in charge of the incline that day.
But the wind was howling that day, and it did. We thought, that's a pretty big hole there in the ground, 1/4 mile long. Didn't matter. It blew right across.
Smoke was still quite a ways away when Henderson decided that everyone needed to come up from the bottom and no more tourists should go back down. Henderson would have to leave when the last were on their way up because his own home was pretty close to that line of fire. His home was spared that day, but the devastation to the park was incredible.
Disbelief, awe, just totally unreal. To think that all that stuff had gotten affected so thoroughly and so quickly. It was quite a sight.
The bridge would be damaged, and most of the structures on the north side of the gorge, including the visitor center, the incline, and the aerial tram, were gone. The rail cars themselves were only slightly damaged. Amazingly, the bottom of the incline was untouched by the flames. In the following months, as the damage was assessed and the insurance claims calculated, it was determined the incline, as it existed, wasn't going to be rebuilt. The wheelhouse and adjacent structures would come down. The rail cars were removed, and they, along with the aerial tram car, were moved to kind of a boneyard just northeast of the bridge. But life would go on. The bridge was repaired, a new visitor center built, and a fancy new aerial tramway would carry passengers across the gorge again. New rides were added as well. A grand reopening was held in May of 2015. The fate of the Royal Gorge Incline Railway today is still unclear. Many people, including Jabbar and Henderson, hope something can be done. Perhaps a gondola to the bottom or a rehab of the old ride of some sort. But costs and returns, like all investments, have to be considered. For now, at least, the ride to the bottom will only live in our memories. That's another edition of Throwback Thursday. Thanks to Fred Javernick, Bill Henderson, Eve Nagaday, and Peggy Gare of the Royal Gorge Bridge Company and the Royal Gorge Regional Museum and History Center for keeping those memories alive. I'm Chris Jenkins.